Lovely. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. My name is Dominique Bouchard. I work for English Heritage and part of the steering group for the Queer Heritage and Collections Network. So you're all very welcome. Delighted to be chairing this wonderful panel about democratizing queer heritage. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind those attendees who are virtual attendees about the survey. The link for virtual delegates is below the main link in the email that you'll have received from Eventbrite. So please do fill that in. It's really important that we're able to evaluate these sorts of programs and let our funders know how brilliant and valued they all are. So thank you for doing that in advance. So this panel is looking at approaches to queer heritage practice that empower queer communities. And some of the themes that are going to be explored include the relationship building with queer communities, skill sharing, volunteer-led projects, and ownership of queer collections. So our first speaker is Matthew Exley. His pronouns are he, him. Matthew is at National Museums Liverpool, and he is the participation producer at NML, and his focus is on adult programs. Matthew's been responsible for developing a pioneering LGBTQ+ inclusive program at National Museums Liverpool, and as well as working on the research projects around LGBTQ+ social history and the creation of the groundbreaking Tales from the City exhibition at the Museum of Liverpool. As well as his work front of house, Matt is also co-chair of NML's LGBTQ+ staff network and sits on its Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion group. Recently, he was instrumental in launching trans inclusion protocols and guidance across NML, as well as mandatory bespoke training session on trans inclusion, which looks at history, inclusive practice, and good allyship. He's passionate about LGBTQ+ inclusion and front and back of house. So today's presentation of his will describe the journey of the Museum of Liverpool from creating its first Trans Day of Visibility programs to ultimately deciding to give it back wholly to local trans communities. So thank you, Matthew, and I'll hand over to you.
Good to go. Right, perfect. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Exley. Thank you for that very thorough introduction. Crikey, I feel all embarrassed now. So I am producer of adult programmes at National Museums Liverpool, which does make it sound like I make smut for Channel 4, but I don't. I lead on the creation of programmes of adult audiences, which for NML we look at sort of 24+. But I have a particular remit looking at our equalities programme. So things like your LGBT history, Q+ history months that we heard about earlier, into slavery remembrance days, all those types of programmes. And I look at them across our 8 venues, so pretty busy. But in this presentation, I'm going to give you a very quick outline of how we built one specific day, our trans inclusive programme at NML for Trans Day of Visibility, looking at how we developed community partners, how we developed a method of co-production with them, and then ultimately how we took the decision to hand over that programme completely to local communities whilst maintaining our support and our offer of resourcing. So Trans Day of Visibility. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back a little bit before that and tell you how we got there in the first place, weave your good story and all of that. So National Museums Liverpool has a decent, I would hope, story of exploring trans identities, telling trans stories. In September 2013, we opened April Ashley Portrait of a Lady, which was the first major exhibition at any national museum or gallery in the UK to explore the life of a trans individual. That was the first thing that we'd sort of ever done. And talk about testing the waters. It was seen by 900,000 people. So, crikey, we started big and we went from there. But exploring this story, exploring local, beginning those ties with local trans communities grew our confidence as a museum network. And we started we launched other exhibitions. So at the top there, we had a brief show of Ken to be Destroyed, which told the story of the uncle of artist Sarah Davidman, who was trans in the 1950s, living publicly as Ken, living privately as a woman. Of course, in a very, very different landscape to the landscape that many of our visitors will experience today. And then below that, we have an image from a 2015 show called Dry Your Eyes, Princess, which was a series of large-scale portraits of trans military veterans. And in this one, you've got Caroline Page holding up her RAF uniform. Caroline was the first officer to publicly transition or openly transition in the British Armed Forces. So we began this sort of building of our relationship, testing the waters, telling new stories, trying new things as an exhibition through our exhibitions program. But part of our exhibitions program had, well, all of it had an accompanying events program as well. There's no point sticking on an exhibition and just funneling people in. You've got to explore it, try new things, have a good program to build and maintain those relationships. This one is it's a photograph from the aftermath of our Trans Day of Remembrance event in the April Ashley exhibition. I think this would be 2013 actually. So by plotting things like Transgender Day of Remembrance in the calendar every year, we began to build that relationship with local trans communities that, yeah, we did offer these one-off exhibitions like April Ashley or Ken to be Destroyed or Dry Your Eyes, Princess. But by committing to regular calendar events throughout the year, we maintained those relationships even though the exhibitions themselves had closed. So I have to admit that these early events, these early programmes, were not particularly developed in consultation with local trans communities. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, hopefully you'll agree with me, but I think many museums have relied on hanging their programmes off the motto, if you build it, they will come. I think that is a way of practice that many museums, many galleries, many cultural institutions did hang programmes on. And you know what? We did get trans people coming in for these events. Were we necessarily building relationships? Were we doing this properly? I'd argue possibly not. And it was at one of these events that at the end, this person came to see me. This is an artwork of Imogen Christie. And Imogen sort of hung around at the end of the event as, you know, when you're dying for a cup, you've been talking for an hour and you really want to just nip off and have a cup of tea and a sit down and a bit of a daydream. And there's always someone who hangs around for a little chat at the end. And sometimes they're a crank, sometimes it's gold, and you're never sure where it's going to go. With Imogen, absolutely, it was gold. And Imogen wanted to have a little bit of a chat about doing an event in the museum. And so I arranged to have a coffee with Imogen the next week. So 1 week later, we were in the cafe at the Museum of Liverpool on the Liverpool dockfront. And Imogen's sort of opening words were, I'm not going to say I want to have a party in your house, but do you want to have a party in our house, don't you? So Imogen wanted to put on an event for Trans Day of Visibility, 31st of March every year, celebrating trans inclusion, trans joy, trans achievement, and trans visibility in the UK today. And I think Imogen was quite surprised when she said, essentially, can I have a party in your house? And we went, well, yeah, go on then. I think Imogen was expecting us to have a little bit more of, like, no, sell it to us, what's this going to be? But yeah, by all means, have a party in our house. So 4 months later, we have the first event for Trans Day of Visibility in the Museum of Liverpool at the end of March 2018. Now, Imogen had been instrumental in pulling together speakers, performers, mindful to include as much diversity from local trans communities as possible. But I remember standing at the door of the event space, waiting for Imogen to arrive, characteristically half an hour late, hoping that all of this work and preparation would translate into a good, healthy number of visitors. I'm sure we've all done it. You put a load of legwork into an event or a programme, and then 3 people turn up and you think, oh. So we were hoping 25, 30 people, that would be a good turnout, wouldn't it? For a first time that we run an event like this for a community in Liverpool that is admittedly quite a small community in our city. But 140 people turned up, and that was absolutely mind-blowing for me. I'm a reasonably experienced museum educator, And there is no greater feeling than having to run around the museum in a blind panic, sourcing chairs, because you haven't got enough in the space. Oh, I live for those moments, I really do. So we ran around the museum like things possessed, grabbing chairs, lashing them out, more and more chairs, till our largest education area was absolutely crammed with people. And it was crammed with mostly people from Liverpool, but actually going around talking to people, we understood people had come from Manchester, come from Leeds, someone had come from London, just because they'd heard about this event and wanted to be part of it. And we were like, right, we're onto something here, aren't we, squad? Come on. So it was a success. I put that down to Imogen Christie doing that legwork, going to the local trans communities, grabbing them in. And I have to be honest, I don't know if this translates to other cities, other places. In Liverpool, not all of the trans groups speak to each other. There's a bit of info, oh, I don't talk to him, she doesn't talk to them. But Imogen was able to go between all of these groups. And I think that is what sort of brought together that sort of sense of unity, different people coming together for an event in what was a neutral and safe space, which was our Museum of Liverpool, and coming together to share something collectively rather than as groups of individuals. So, with Imogen at the helm as our community partner, Trans Day of Visibility became part of our offer at the museum, and again built into that regular year-on-year offer. So 2018, 2019, we built on it again, similar numbers, building the event. And then, of course, 2 weeks before TDOV 2020, I'm not going to dwell on this, but something quite big happened, which meant that we had to suddenly cancel everything because we couldn't open the museum because of COVID. So in 2 weeks, we took what was an in-person event at the museum. We decided, I mean, sitting in Imogen's flat over many glasses of cups of coffee, planning what we were going to do. We partnered with LCR Pride Foundation at the last minute. They'd had experience, Liverpool City Region Pride Foundation. They'd experience of delivering activity online. And within 2 weeks, we managed to pull this itinerary together, this programme together, deliver it online. And then we got all excited for maybe a hybrid event, something for 2021. But of course, it was COVID again, so we couldn't open the museum. But during the intervening year between 2020 and 21, we'd had a conversation with more trans communities than we'd ever engaged with before, mostly online because of all the restrictions. We realised that online delivery wasn't always the only way of getting things out there. A lot of older trans people might not have access to technological provision. A lot of younger trans people we'd noted from our consultations that actually had to go back in the closet. It couldn't be open, didn't feel comfortable having these conversations in houses where not everyone might know of their identity or want these conversations going on. So as well as an online event, we created these postal packs, a booklet on the left there, 56-page booklet full of stories, poems, thoughts, drawings from local trans people, banner, badge, ribbon for people who were able to be more open in their own households at a time where we were all stuck indoors. So we posted 250 of these out as a museum, and we handed another 50 out to local LGBTQ plus youth groups to distribute amongst their young members. But we felt the need to maintain a big visible presence as well as a museum, big shows of support. So we hosted the Rainbow Bridge artwork on Liverpool's waterfront in March 2021. And around the same time that I think groups of 6 or 2 households could come together, as long as there was a T in the name of the date and you didn't have a Scotch egg on you. We opened this artwork, and of course the first thing we did was a big show of trans support, of trans allyship, which is something that we've wanted to do as we believe is important as a museum, to use our visibility and our power to show allyship. Unfortunately, a few months after this, Imogen Christie died quite suddenly of cancer, and we lost our community partner. But a few days before Imogen died, I'd been in her flat. We'd still been plotting what we were going to do for the next TDOV and the next TDOV, and what programmes we were going to do in between. And I must say, there are lots of programmes that I don't have the time to talk about in this session because I think I'm already overrunning. but we had so many plans and ideas for the future. Imogen sort of bringing the community together and finding a way to move forward. So for International Pronouns Day, 2021, the museum reopened. We held a big event, partially as a chance for communities to come together to remember Imogen and to celebrate the contribution that Imogen had brought. But we were able to utilise Imogen's ideas as well for TDOV 2020, 2021, to pull together ideas to form a programme that was completely from Imogen's mind, from Imogen's consultation with local communities. And so it was trans-led. Even though Imogen couldn't be there, it had come out of those conversations. And this is one of the things that we showed. It was a series of artworks from a local artist in the middle there in the red scarf, Mandy Romero, who travelled around the Central Asian republics trying to make contact with local trans communities, I think in 2018, and photographed the entire journey. And I'd put money that that's Mandy buying 20 Marlboro Red somewhere in Kazakhstan there. And this was just one of the things that we were able to put on for International Pronouns Day, an idea of contacts that had come out of that consultation and come through from Imogen. So we used International Pronouns Day as an opportunity to launch TDOV 2022, to go, do you know what, we're celebrating Imogen, but she's not here anymore. We need trans communities to step forward and fill that void. And we launched that at International Pronouns Day. We began monthly consultation groups with local trans communities. This is one held in the Museum of Liverpool. And we used that as an opportunity to begin to give power back over to the trans community. For too long, it had been NML and Imogen and then LCR Pride consulting with trans communities and then putting on the event. We felt the need to try and give this better back to the community. We'd give the support, we'd give the advice if it was needed, we'd give them space if they wanted it, we'd continue to resource it if they wanted to, whether that's money, in-kind resourcing, whatever they wanted. But we wanted them to organise it, them to tell us what they wanted. And through this consultation process, through giving this back to the community, eventually we landed at a position where TDOV Liverpool now has a chair, Lily Rose Hunt, who chairs TDOV, who chairs these meetings. And these meetings now, half of them don't take place on National Museum's Liverpool grounds. They take place elsewhere in the city to be more accessible if people want to feel more safe going to those. And we've got a plan for TDOV 2023 now. And I'd love to be able to stand here and tell you what that plan is. But actually I can't. And I'm quite happy at that. I'm being told it next week. I'm going to one of these consultation sessions, I think next Wednesday. And Lily and the TDOV group that is now developed around Lily are going to present to me their plans for the year. I have been told it's going to be a 5-day festival over a weekend with interventions and a club night. I don't think that's taken place in the museum. But for the first time, we have been able to, through that process of consultation and skill sharing and a promise and a commitment to maintaining the resourcing that we always have, we're in a position where we've been able to completely hand TDOV back. And I hope that they come back to the museum. I hope that the museum is still linked to TDOV. If it isn't, and that's a community decision, that's fine. We'll continue to give them advice if they want it. We'll continue to support them if they want it. We'll continue to resource it if they want it. They don't have to use us. They don't have to stick our logo on anything. It's just the right thing for us to do. So that is how we've taken TDOV from what's something that we do as a museum and given it back to the community. And I hope Imogen Christie would be proud that we have, and we will continue to let the trans community have a party in our gaff if they want to. If they don't want to have a party in our gaff, that doesn't matter. We'll still supply the vodka. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That was a wonderful talk, and I'm sure we're going to have loads of questions for you. So our next speaker is Adam Baker, who's a community activist based in, archivist, not activist, but maybe an activist too, I don't know, Based in Norwich, he graduated from the University of East Anglia's Museum Studies Master's Program in 2019 with a focus on queer museology. After a brief stint reviving the Harlow Museum, he returned to Norwich in late 2021. In March the following year, he started the Queer Norfolk project, creating a web-based decentralized database of local queer artifacts, ephemera, literature, textiles, and more, available to all to access and managed by Norfolk's queer communities. This project is currently working out of the Norfolk Heritage Center. His presentation is going to explore how Queer Norfolk Project is working to hand ownership of queer collections back to the communities and empower those communities to access, discover, and contribute to collections that reflect their shared histories. Thank you very much, Matt. Looking for Adams, I think.
So I brought this along to make a point, which so I'll follow up now. To wrap your turn. Conservatives don't tweet me. So morning everyone. I'm Adam, as Dom's already introduced me, and today I'm going to have a little word with you about Queer Norfolk, which is a project that I started in March, and in September we got the website up finally with the help of our local Pride, which has been brilliant. And I'm just going to kind of tell you the story of how it came about and what it's doing and where we hope to go. So the origin story starts with it's a little bit sexy. It starts with this. Oh no, what about is it? Oh, there we go. It's a meerkat. So this meerkat arrived in the Norfolk Heritage Centre a few years ago. But before that, it had a very different life, as you may well imagine. It's been to Prides, it's been to London Club Nights, and it's been to Norwich Fetish Nights, and it's still hanging out in the back rooms, but just the back rooms of Norfolk Library, which isn't quite as sexy, but there we go. So the arrival of this cat was brought about by a project by community librarians Joe Foster Murdoch and Rachel Radley. They work at the Norfolk Heritage Centre, which is Norfolk Library and Information Service based in Norwich. And this collection started off as a single box, but as you can see now, it fills up an entire bay in their roller racking. And I came initially in March to sort of volunteer to help them organise this collection, get it sort of up to speed. It had been collected so rapidly that it needed, a little bit of direction. So I came in to kind of prune and manage that. And when it came to finding these items, like the cat, like the flag, these items are not very well suited to being stored in those conditions. So ideally, they'll be moved to a local museum where they can be cared for better, basically. And Rich and I thought it was a real shame because these items have been donated to this particular collection under a particular set of circumstances, and it's a shame that they're going to lose that link with that original collection. The library and the museum, their cataloguing systems are completely different. They do talk to each other, but they're not linked as such. And this kind of inspired Queer Norfolk, where there can be this space online where these objects can be sort of searched a bit more easily. So this presentation is going to examine how queer and volunteer-led projects can work alongside institutions to democratise ownership and enhance accessibility and visibility of queer collections, how this sort of project can expand knowledge beyond museums, bring online community collection and curation to the table, and can address sort of the gatekeeper mentality that lots of museums are now working to fight against, and that kind of holds back inclusive and more open approaches. And obviously not got long, like being a cabinet minister at the moment, so I'm going to try and speak through as much as possible. So you're going to shift it into two parts. One of them is working with established collections, and one of them is a community archiving element. So first of all, the gatekeeper mentality. So rethinking cataloguing was an arts council it was an initiative that culminated in Spectrum 5.1 being released, so just a couple of weeks ago, actually. It's a really commendable set of recommendations that seek to address the gatekeeper mentality as collections are being built up and maintained. And Queer Norfolk challenges this gatekeeper mentality through what I'm going to call punk archiving. So the phrase is something that I have stolen and bastardized from Kostas Koreas and William Caraher, and their original phrase was punk archaeology. And punk archaeology is a fusion of punk sensibilities with archaeological practices. It puts a real focus on being creative, DIY. There's a real sense of place, spontaneity, and accessibility, especially using accessible tools, like especially digital tools. Just as punk rose up in the late 70s and early 80s to counter political movements, this idea is about counteracting issues that some communities have with museological practices. And it prioritizes action that's quick, direct, and democratic. So the way it does this is through a system called eHive. eHive is an online cataloging software. This is the boring bit. And essentially it's just like any other catalog software, except it's online straight away. People can comment and they can tag on it. And that's the key thing. There's really good tools on it that communities can use to interact. So, for example, there is an entry that is just a few Pride badges from Norwich Pride, and one of the original organisers of Pride saw this on there and decided to comment. And if you look at the comment there, it kind of organically, they sort of say it will just organically put that up there, talked about things that resonate with local people, but by carving out this space online and allowing people to take ownership, these stories can be told by queer people in their own words. There are obviously some criticisms to this kind of thing. One of the big ones levelled at punk archaeology is that it doesn't actually feed back into contemporary practice. And as an outside entity from museums as a whole, Queer Norfolk does fall into this category. It can kind of challenge this gatekeeper mentality, but it might not necessarily instigate change. And that's why it's been really important to get buy-in from local institutions as early as possible, really. So by buying in, they're not only sort of fulfilling, the spectrum requirements, but they are the openness of sharing their records will hopefully allow them to shape their practice by engaging with community knowledge and being challenged on things. And just by giving up that just a small amount of control over how records are shown, it can really bring about some change. Norfolk Museums are great at doing this already. Melissa's going to have a chat to you in an hour about what she's doing down in Thetford that does very similar things to this project. And the Heritage Library also do this. They run an LGBT history club every month. This is something that was done recently at the club. So it's a list of cottaging hotspots, pubs and bars in Norwich. And this gets added to over the course of a session, post-it notes. It's a bit of a messy one to catalogue, as you might imagine, but it just shows that there is this work being done with communities, but then work can also be done outside of that. And that's where I come on to the second point of the presentation, and that is that the website does actually have a life outside of already established collections, and there is a case for maintaining like an independent community archive. So the picture that you see here, this is someone called Adam, confusingly, and Adam brought his collection along to the Heritage Centre to have a look at and to be catalogued digitally on the Queer Norfolk site. And Adam's collection really talks about his experiences with Pride, with coming out, and autism as well. And Adam just couldn't have donated this collection to the centre. It's part of his routine. It's part of what he it's so part of his being that he couldn't possibly donate this physically. So a digital donation was appropriate in this case. And it might be sort of contra to conventional practices, but I would argue that being able to have this digital donation online is better than not having this at all. And by affording Adam that opportunity, we've now got a really rich understanding of how an individual in our time can relate to Pride and but through their through their own lens, I suppose. The other thing that I think this does is because this project is in with local pride rather than any kind of local institution, is that there are sort of other protections arguably that are afforded to it. So all of the institutions that I've mentioned so far that bought into it, so the library, but there's also talks with the local museums who will be taking some of these objects, and East Anglia Film Archive, some other places. They're all controlled by the county council, and with the current culture wars that are going on, especially in relation to our trans siblings, it raises these fairly troubling parallels with Section 28. Of course, came on a wave of optimism at the end of quite a wave of optimism in the LGBT rights movement, and these parallels being drawn up again. What does that mean for people? Would it mean that all of this work that we're doing, that we're talking about today, would it have to stop? Could objects be withdrawn from access? Those kinds of things. So by having this project, which sits under a slightly different umbrella, it will hopefully just have a little degree of separation. There are obviously weaknesses to that approach. Having things only online have its own challenges. But some would argue that community hands are perhaps the safest. So just to kind of round off, I suppose, Queer Norfolk is a queer and volunteer-led project that works alongside institutions to democratise ownership and accessibility of LGBTQ collections in Norfolk. It's managed by queer communities through a punk approach, a web-based decentralised database of queer life that is available for all to view and to contribute to. The project allies itself well with the new Spectrum guidance and creates a strong case for working for institutions to work alongside Queer Norfolk and other similar projects. Working with institutions to it can work with institutions to democratise ownership and accessibility of queer collections, and it provides a template for others regionally to do the same. Thank you very much.
To maybe come up to this table so that we can do questions. I think the microphone over here will pick you up. So does anybody have a question to start? Cool, so I'll go first. So my first question is for Matt, which is about how the TDOF project team are working. So are they volunteers? Did the museum hire them as consultants? And maybe you can say a little bit about that, how that relationship works. Do they just say like, this is our plan, it's going to cost £35,000, what's the PO number? Or
Well, at the moment, I think we're still, if we're very honest, in a transitional phase. I think the idea is, hopefully we would like to get it to sort of a similar organisation to something like LCR Pride Foundation, where you do have a chair and a board of trustees, but we're at the point of still developing that. So at the moment, the people involved in that group are there in a voluntary capacity, but collectively we are looking at ways forward of looking at funding bids and putting things together with the museum and LCR Pride Foundation's backing to support funding bids, so that in the future there will be ways of remunerating people for their time better. But I think it's the way with most sort of grassroots organisations. We're hoping that the growth of TDOV is more grassroots than we created it. We want them to create it, and we'll support them in creating it. That is the sort of natural growth of these things, that they do go from grassroots voluntary led, and then once that's sort of underway, you can then look at funding opportunities to have a CEO or remuneration of board and a sort of more formal consultancy agreement. But that will be for them to sort out, not for us, hopefully.
that's great. It sounds like you've been a wonderful incubator for that sort of a.
Fingers crossed. Let me know. I'll let you know in March when it's over, when the first one's done.
Do you have any questions? Yeah.
I think it's a question for both of you, just on the broad nature of democratizing queer heritage and queer spaces, and especially recently with I guess, a more infamous sort of strand of resistance against specifically the trans community across the wider LGBT community. And while it is a small segment, sort of protecting these spaces and how you ensure that these spaces are still safe for trans people, well, not historically, recently, with sort of hijacking of pride protests and queer spaces of elements of the community who want to separate transness from the rest of the community, and just an approach that can be taken that sort of stops that and protects the trans community itself, and just ensures that that representation is still key and centered and that it's not at risk.
Yeah. So the project that, well, the project I'm working on, Queer Norfolk, it's community led. So the people, trans people in the community, are just involved in its very kind of fabric. So it would be, it's not that there isn't opposition in Norwich to trans people, but on the whole, it's a slightly more welcoming space than perhaps other places are. Just by, yeah, I guess just sort of a question of them trans people being involved with it. It's not a very good answer. Sorry. I might come back to me.
Oh, crikey. I see it as I'm a cisgendered person trying to do myself out of a job. Absolutely. And I think as part of the TDOV process of handing it wholeheartedly back to trans communities, that safeguards the event from becoming hijacked by other voices. Because if I look back at our history of sort of trans inclusive programming at National Museums Liverpool, those early days didn't really talk to anyone trans. It was all led by cis people, and by sort of moving away from that and wholeheartedly making sure that we put effort into making sure that we're not giving over too much influence to people who aren't of those communities, it does safeguard that. So if our TDOV events are trans led by trans people making the decisions, trans people deciding which speakers are speaking, what subjects they want to speak on, what the themes are this year, then it's really hard for anti-trans groups or individuals to hijack that, because there's not a space for them in the decision-making process. And I think that's hopefully that then polices itself. If it doesn't police itself, then maybe that's when we have to be a little bit more heavy-handed and be the big bad museum network, and LCR Pride can step in and be the big bad LCR Pride Foundation. But I don't think we'll have to, because I think giving the decision to trans groups and trans communities, giving them all the power, stops the possibility of that hijacking that you mentioned. If I come back next year, and I might have a different answer for you, but maybe I'm being naive, but I'm hoping that is the way that we do protect that.
Yeah, so kind of on the back of that, it's all ditto really. Like, the organisation that we're partnered with most closely is Norwich Pride, and Norwich Pride are deliberately very inclusive in their approach to things, and that carries over into Queer Norfolk as well. There's also other local groups that we're working with. So one called Ket's Rebellion, that is a trans positive group that operate in the Norwich area. They're a fairly autonomous collective. Their recent Trans Pride picnic was massively successful, and that involved bringing the community together to sort of protect one another, to engage with lots of different subgroups in the trans community, opportunities for poetry and performance, and really good positive grassroots stuff. And they're involved as well with doing in the near future, hopefully, a little project around some sticker wars that have been going on in the NR3 postcode, which should bring some really interesting results. Because the thing is, it's not there is transphobia. Obviously, we're all very much aware of it, and it's about how we engage, not necessarily with that, but how we document that process. That Queer Norfolk is essentially at its core, it is a process which is primarily about documentation, and it's about recording and interacting with things in online spaces. So it's moderated. It's not like a complete free for all. So we can make sure that the comments are appropriate that people are making. So yeah, there is that kind of that general oversight as well.
Any other questions? Caesar's got one online. Let's take one of those first.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got a question from Louise for Adam. And Louise was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what buy-in from local institutions means. Did you approach them? How do they contribute to the project? And do the institutions incorporate any of the comments or tags from eHive back into their collection information systems?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, it's still quite early days, but the Heritage Centre has been there from day one. So when I say buy-in, what I mean is obviously we have to make sure that the records that are displayed on the site, if you've got your phone on you, you could have a quick log on now if you wanted, queernorfolk.com. Probably should have plugged that during the presentation, actually. If you have a quick look, obviously you've got all the data there as you would on like a museum catalogue record, and that record is taken from museum catalogues, obviously. So we need to be able to have access to them and to some of the stuff that perhaps isn't always on public display to really make the records shine and enrich them. So when I say buy-in, what I mean is let us put the record on the website. That's all that buy-in means essentially. And then in relation to how it kind of feeds back, obviously because it is basically, I knew I was going to start talking about Excel spreadsheets. I knew it was going to happen. It's just unavoidable. You can export things from the eHive website. You can export stuff, and that can just be uploaded as an XML onto Modes, which is what the local museum authority uses. So that's how that will feed back in. So the community tags and the comments can be fed back into that system at the end of things. So it kind of works in a loop. And obviously the project is completely voluntary. So it relies on just people locally doing what we do, and then there's just a small amount of buy-in that the museums will need for staff time, essentially, to process that at their end. So that's what I mean by buy-in. These things just have to be formalised and agreed. And the Heritage Centre, as I said, are already on board. They're already doing really great work, and so thanks, Rachel. It's been massively helpful.
We've got time for one more question. We can probably squeeze it to two if everybody's sniffy with it.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such inspiring talks from both of you. And I had a question that you might have kind of the different sides perspective on. Adam, you talked a bit about like that punk archiving and that idea of it being coming from the community and spontaneous and kind of against the establishment. And Matt, you're obviously coming from like within National Museums Liverpool. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that relationship between a community group that wants to keep itself like autonomous and coming from within those community and holding in community hands, and also being an institution trying to build that trust and kind of how does that community not feel, I guess, like it's I don't know, like in some way being like changed or maybe corrupted by that relationship with an institution, and how can the institution kind of help them feel trust and feel like they're getting to keep their autonomy, if that makes sense as a question. Like, how do you build that relationship?
Crikey. I was going to say, go easy on us. I think that the most important thing is considerations of power within that relationship. As the big scary, I'm sure our director never ceases to forget telling us that it's £20 million to turn organise all of that nonsense. Please don't be on the call. We are a big scary institution that goes back 150 years. We've got a big voice. We've got a lot of power if we need to use that. And I think handing that over wholeheartedly where possible maintains that trust, but it also empowers that community further. And at any point, the trans community can walk away from NML and go, do you know what? Get in the bin. We don't want to work with you anymore. And that is sort of fine. And we've been quite clear from the start of this sort of rebuilding of Trans Day of visibility with the group that we're only there as long as they want us. So I'll advise Lily as long as Lily wants that advice. I'm not going to try and change that group. And at times there have been decisions made that the museum probably wouldn't have necessarily made on its own. One is about sort of Merseyside Police and their involvement in Trans Day of Visibility. And the decision was made by the community that they didn't want the police there this year, the last year. That's probably not a decision that NML would have made on its own, but we showed them support. We absolutely stood by them having that decision and handing that power back to them. So I think as a big scary institution, by abdicating all that power that we could have and handing it to that community totally where possible, allows us to keep that trust, maintain the integrity of that community's interests, beliefs, wishes, aspirations, dreams, hopes, and all of that, and allows us to actually do the right thing. And I've been having conversations with some colleagues at Leicester about sort of co-production frameworks. And one of the biggest things for me is about why are we doing any of this? And it has to be underpinned, I think, fundamentally by the institution doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's not about sticking our logo on something or look how good we look, going to all, he says at a conference, going to all these conferences and blagging about, oh, look how inclusive we are, woo, when's lunch? It's not about that. It has to be underpinned by doing the right thing. And I think as long as we're being guided by that ethos, then hopefully the community understand that, keep that power and hopefully keep the relationship going. But if they don't want to keep that relationship going, we've given them the power to say no. And I think that's how big institutions should operate with community partners, whether they all do or not. That's another conference, that.
Yeah, so when I started the project out initially, actually, I wasn't going to have any kind of scope for like digital donations or anything because I'd been through the museum studies mill. I was, very much of the idea of, everything has to be done by the book, it has to be done, in this proper way. And that's when the punk sensibility started bleeding, and I sort of questioned, well, why does it have to be done like that? And obviously, there are lots of really great reasons why it has to be done like that. But there are some people that would just never, ever, ever be able to participate in anything like this if you impose that set of rules on it. So by having the community archiving kind of methodology behind it as well, the digital donations, it lets people who wouldn't usually want their stuff sitting under an institution, especially a local authority one as well. It lets them participate in that way. And I think that's key. It's that you can have it both ways. It doesn't have to be my way or the highway all the time. Exceptions can be made and are made all the time anyway. So there's no reason not to open up the process more.
That's probably it. Please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers and great questions and